Good evening. Now then, let us begin right where we are, and I think you will recognize this place. In our time, we are trying to manage everything: body, money, relationships, career, even our spirituality, by the private machinery of me. We inventory the vitamins and the calories. We run the budgets and the calendars. We negotiate the texts and the meetings. And then, to be safe, we add a regimen for the soul, a stack of books, a tracker for meditation minutes, and a podcast for the commute. And if anything still slips through, we promise to try harder tomorrow. You see, it is all very sincere, very industrious, and very exhausting. Now watch this carefully. I am not here to condemn one bit of striving. Never be ashamed to admit you have been sincere. Never, never, never. We must never use the words right and wrong about these efforts. We speak of states and stages of consciousness. There is a stage in which life appears to be governed by personal sense, and from that level the only thing you know to do is to push, to plan, to protect. In that stage, burnout is not a failure. It is simply the honest harvest of the seed you planted. I am the doer. In other words, the burden is built into the belief. Now then, here is the turning hinge, and I want you to hear it with no strain, no resistance. Grace does not begin when you redouble the push. Grace begins the very moment you relinquish the claim to be the governor and the worker. The secret that relieves the pressure is as old as the teacher who said, "The Father within doeth the works." I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. Grace is not an energy that turbocharges your will. It is the presence that replaces your will as the government of your life. The me that must make it happen, feed it, fix it, keep it all from falling, steps back, and the inner Christ steps forward as law, as order, as the quiet ease at the center of action. You see, when you enthrone me as the superintendent of your universe, you must carry it. And it will feel as if the world is always 10 minutes late and 5 pounds heavy. But when there is a transfer of government, when the yoke shifts from personal sense to the Father within, you discover something incredible. Life is still life. The body still needs care. Money still flows in and out. People still call and plans are made. Action continues, but strain dissolves. Rest appears not as escape from responsibility, but as the atmosphere in which responsibilities arrange themselves by a wisdom you did not design. So for tonight, take this much. Burnout is the voice of a state of consciousness that has mistaken itself for God. Do not argue with it and do not accuse it. Simply recognize it as a signal that a transfer of government is due. From I must to the Father within doeth. From that recognition, we move quietly into the way of grace. Now then, before we go one step further, let us settle this forever. We must never use the word failure about your striving. Never, never, never. We must never use the words right and wrong about your past methods or your present pressure. There are states and stages of consciousness. On one level, you only know to push and plan and brace yourself against tomorrow. And from that state, the best you can do is try harder. There is no shame in that. It is honest to the level you were in. The harvest is not a verdict on your worth. It is a message about your government. You see, even our spirituality, when filtered through personal sense, becomes a new arena for self-violence. We take the most beautiful words, discipline, devotion, excellence, and we make them carry a whip. We call willpower a virtue and treat exhaustion as the price of admission to holiness. And when the body weakens or the mood sinks, we pronounce a sentence: I have failed. No, it is not failure. It is a stage revealing its limit. It is simply the small government confessing, I cannot administer a whole life. I speak now from the standpoint of the infinite way. Human effort is a temporary stepping stone, not a savior. As children, we lean on training wheels. As beginners, we practice schedules, lists, alarms. Good. But watch out. When effort becomes identity, when I am the one who must hold this together becomes your name, you have taken the stepping stone and built a throne out of it. That is bondage. That is why the yoke grows heavy. Not because you are active, but because you are authoring. Activity is not the problem. Personal authorship is. The weight is hidden in the claim, I am the source. Let me ask you gently, and do not hurry to answer. What is it in you that is trying so hard? What is it afraid will happen if it stops trying to be the governor? Sit with that. Do you feel how quickly a picture appears? Collapse, loss, being found out? Or perhaps the terror that nothing will move without your push? That picture is the child of a belief that life depends upon your machinery. In other words, burnout is not the result of too many tasks. It is the symptom of a private cosmos carried by a private self. Now then, here is the grace in this recognition. Nothing in this diagnosis asks you to abandon your work, your schedule, or your excellence. It asks only this: release authorship. Let the inner government change. Continue your activity, make the call, write the brief, bathe the child. But loosen the secret claim, I am the doer. Begin to witness action instead of manufacturing it. The teacher said, the Father within doeth the works. When that is not a motto, but a state of consciousness, busyness remains, strain dissolves. And you will discover, quietly, that there was never a moral to keep, only a maturation to undergo. From personal striving as an immature government, to grace as the true and restful administration of your life. Now then, let us take up a very tender point, and I want you to hear it without defense, because I speak not with judgment, but with the plainness that comes of watching this play out over and over again. You can have discipline. You can have plans. You can have the most admirable habits, and still your insides are racing as if chased. Why? Because willpower, even the very best kind, even decorated with spiritual language, is still personal sense trying to be God. You see, it can rearrange the furniture of your day. It cannot impart peace to your consciousness. It may improve behavior. It cannot confer rest. And rest, remember this, is the sign of true government. I'll go further. In my experience, and I say this without any spiritual pride, willpower can make a good show. It can clean closets, hit deadlines, conquer appetites, and produce the outward look of mastery. But watch out. The center has not changed. The same me sits on the throne with a shinier crown. And here is the built-in trap of that method. It yields two harvests only: pride when it seems to work, and despair when it doesn't. Both are forms of separation from grace. Pride says, I did it. I am the source. Despair says, I cannot do it. The source has failed. In other words, whether inflated or deflated, personal sense remains the hero or the failure of its own story. That is bondage. We must never use the words right and wrong about willpower as such. There are states and stages of consciousness, and on some levels, it is all you know to do. So do not be ashamed of discipline. Use your calendar. Keep your agreements. Show up. But never, never, never confuse that with spiritual life. Self-improvement, no matter how refined, leaves the self on the throne. Spiritual power dethrones the self without violence and installs grace as the governor. And when that happens, activity can remain or even increase, but strain is gone because the sense of authorship is gone. The yoke is easy, not because the load vanished, but because the government changed. You may ask, then is the answer to give up responsibility? No, not at all. The answer is to receive a different source for responsibility. Responsibility under grace is transparency. We become a window, not a generator. The Christ within, call it divine presence, call it the Father within, assumes the doing while we assume the listening. And from that listening, decisions are made, emails are written, families are tended, businesses are guided. But the atmosphere in which all this occurs is Sabbath. You feel it. There is order without tension, movement without hurry, excellence without fear. That is how you know. Willpower pushes, grace unfolds. Willpower drives from behind, grace draws from within. Willpower produces motion, grace produces rest, and rest is the sign that the true government is present and operative. So for this moment, let us consent to a simple exchange. Keep your outer forms as needed, but relinquish the inner claim, I must make it happen. Begin to watch for that old rhythm, pride when you win, despair when you lose, and let it cue you to return to the center. The aim is not to be less engaged with life, but to be less the doer of it, until life itself, as presence, lives you. Now then, let us put our hand upon the heart of the matter and feel its beat. The Father within me, He doeth the works. That is not poetry, that is law. I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. God is not a sympathetic assistant to personal sense. God is the law and the life, acting as the only doer. In other words, the same presence that set a star in its course and keeps the tide in rhythm is the presence that, when acknowledged and allowed, assumes the government of your living. Not sometimes, not when you are holy enough. Never, never, never as a sporadic exception. It is the only government there is. We merely awaken to it. What then is this transfer of government? Plainly this: the personal sense releases its secret claim to authorship, and the Christ within, call it the Father within, the presence, the Spirit, takes over the functions we have been mimicking: guidance, timing, strength, and result. Grace is not God lending a hand to your project. Grace is God replacing your hand as the instrument and your project as an outline. You find yourself saying, not, help me do this, but, Father, be the doer. And the tone changes. The mind that was arranging and defending gives consent, and something begins to move from within out, without push, without strain, without the exhausting rehearsal of outcomes. You may say, if I stop being the doer, won't I become passive, lazy, irresponsible? Watch out. That is the fear of a dethroned ego, imagining a vacuum where there is, in fact, a higher authority. Yielding is not apathy. Yielding is obedience. Obedience to what? To the inward government that already is. Responsibility does not disappear. It is transfigured. We stop carrying life as an owner and begin stewarding it as a transparency. You still sign your name. You still keep your word. You still meet the day. But you do it as one listening to a director, not as a nervous playwright revising the script every 5 minutes. How does this feel? First, the shift from pushing to being led. The mental engines that were revving with plans and alarms quiet down, and there is often a small interior click, a sense of contact, of rightness, without any picture added to it. Anxiety, which was demanding pictures, loses its leverage because you are not outlining. There comes a calm certainty, unexplained to the mind but felt in the marrow, that action will arise out of this rest at its proper moment, and that it will carry its own provision with it. In that atmosphere, a phone call is made or not made. An email is answered now or after lunch, not by compulsion, but by an inner yes that has weight. Do not mistake this for inaction. The day may be as full as ever. Children need breakfast. Teams need direction. Clients need clarity. You move among these with the quiet knowledge that you are not the supply, not the wisdom, not the power. You are the place where supply, wisdom, and power appear. And you will notice small, lawful signs of new government. Fewer corrections later because the first impulse was clean. A door that used to jam now opens without your shoulder against it. Strength that used to ebb at 4 o'clock remains because you are not spending it to hold up a sky that God is already carrying. So let us consent to this transfer. Father within, do thou the works. Not as a slogan to cover fear, but as a living willingness to let the government be upon His shoulder. Then rest becomes the atmosphere of motion, and results come as the added form of an inner contact, lawfully, gently, and without strain, because grace has not helped your effort. Grace has replaced it. Now then, let us come straight to the place where many of us, even with good intentions, keep reinstalling the old government. We get tired. The calendar crowds us. The mind grows foggy. And what do? We go to God and say, "Give me strength. Give me motivation. Give me willpower to get through." Watch out. I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. We must never use the words right and wrong about that impulse. It is a state and stage of consciousness, and on that level it seems natural. But see the subtle error. The very moment you ask God for strength to carry life, you have already assumed that you are the carrier. You have kept the throne of me and merely requested better fuel. What is the use of asking God for anything, least of all more energy, if God is already the life itself? What would you tell life about life that life does not already know? You see, the petition presumes separation. Here I am, weak and apart, and there is God, strong and apart, who will send a package labeled oomph. That is not prayer. That is mythology. The moment you turn God into an energy drink, a motivation hack, a cosmic assistant for your overloaded schedule, you have reduced spirit to a stimulant. God is spirit. God is law as well as love. God is not a Santa Claus, not a supermarket, and certainly not a productivity app. True prayer is not asking at all. Prayer is contact. Prayer is communion. Prayer is wordless receptivity in which the false sense of separation dissolves and the realized presence stands revealed as the only life, the only mind, the only doer. In that holy hush, you are not getting strength. You are losing the belief that you were a private strength to begin with. In other words, prayer does not equip the ego. Prayer retires it. And when the pretend carrier steps aside, the government of the Father within appears as peace, as timing, as order. You may say, "But I need help. My day is full." Yes, And I say to you, go to God for God. Go to the source for the source. Sit, be still. Let gratitude and love rise without an object. Gratitude not for something, but for isness itself. And wait until the inner click of contact comes. Do not outline what you want that contact to do. Do not bargain for a boost. Yield to presence until the very need for willpower evaporates. Because where presence governs, there is rest, and rest is the sign of true government. And then watch the lawful effects. Guidance appears without debate. An unnecessary meeting falls off the calendar of its own accord. The right words come without rehearsing. You find yourself doing what must be done with a quiet, effortless sufficiency, and leaving undone what belongs to the wind. You did not receive more push. You entered more presence. That is prayer as contact, and by that contact, the outer life conforms without strain, not by magic, but by the law of grace acting as the only doer. Now then, let us look, very gently and very honestly, at the modern religion of outlining. Because here is the hidden drain most of us have called being responsible. We script tomorrow's mood and next year's income. We rehearse conversations 3 times before breakfast. We force a relationship to become what our picture requires. We monetize every gift before the ink of joy is dry. We forecast outcomes, hedge against imaginary weather, and rename the vibration of anxiety prudence. You see, nothing is left to unfold. Everything must be made to happen. And then we wonder why the body sags at 4 o'clock and the mind snaps in the night. Now, I am not going to say to you that planning is wrong. Never. We must never use the words right and wrong about these habits. There are states and stages of consciousness. At a certain stage, outlining is the only language you know for safety. But watch out. I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. The very moment you begin to outline outcomes, you descend into personal sense and attempt to manipulate effects. You step out of the simplicity of being led and into the strain of being the arranger of an entire universe. In other words, you take upon your shoulders the government that belongs to the Father within, and, by that assumption, you create weariness as surely as a man trying to row against the tide he should have ridden. Here's the law as I have witnessed it over and over and over again. Control creates tension. Tension creates fatigue. Fatigue breeds fear. Fear demands more control, and the wheel spins tighter and tighter. The calendar becomes a barricade, the inbox a courtroom, and your own mind the prosecutor asking, "Did you cover every angle?" There is no rest in that question because it has no end. Effects are endless, and when you try to manage effects, you become endless management. But if I do not outline, won't everything fall apart? That is the old governor speaking. The transfer we have been describing is not into passivity, it is into obedience. The Father within doeth the works. Planning under grace is listening, not forcing. It is sketching in pencil, not carving in stone. Make your appointments, yes. Draft your proposal, yes. But hold every line subject to the inner yes that comes from contact. Never, never, never outline to God what to do, when to do it, or through whom. God is spirit and law as well as love. When you outline, you are trying to steer law instead of yield to it. Let me give you a simple measure. Exhaustion grows in direct proportion to how much you insist on outlining and managing from personal sense. The way out is not better outlining, not smarter hacks, not a new app to corral your life. The way out is relinquishment. Seek first the kingdom within until contact is felt, and let action be the child of that rest. Then, quite without strain, some meetings vanish of their own weight. A letter writes itself in 10 clear sentences. A knot in a friendship loosens without a speech. And the day, still full, ceases to be heavy. You did not perfect your outline. You retired it. You let the government return to its rightful place, and life, by law, simplified. Now then, since we have seen that the way out is relinquishment and not better outlining, let us come to the practice itself. Because without a practice, the mind will rush back to its old desk and begin to write orders for the universe. I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. This is not technique in the human sense. It is the posture of soul that makes contact possible and lets the Christ within assume the government. First, acknowledge God. Not as a sky person, not as a helper of projects, but as omnipresent spirit, the only presence, the only power, the life and law of being. Quietly, without strain, let there be this recognition. Father, thou art here. God is spirit. God is law as well as love. There is no other presence and no other power. Not long words, just an inner bow, the honoring of what already is. Second, be still. Let the mind cease its rehearsals. No outlining, no bargaining, no composing of tomorrow's apology or next week's plan. Be still. Let the breath come and go without you running it. Let the silence be silence. If thoughts appear, do not fight them. Do not follow them. Let them be as birds crossing a wide sky. You see, we are not trying to improve thought. We are consenting to a realm in which thought is not the governor. Third, rest in gratitude and love without an object. Not gratitude for a raise, not love for a person. Pure gratitude for isness. Pure love of truth, because truth is. Let your heart, if it will, whisper nothing more than, "Thank you," without a reason attached. And if words are needed for a moment to anchor the attention, let them be only these. Father, reveal thyself. Father, reveal thyself. Not as magic syllables, not as a button you press for effects, but as a doorbell at the house of your own consciousness. Knock, and then wait. Father, reveal thyself. And nothing else. Now then, what not to do? Do not use the silence to plan. That is the old treasurer embezzling sacred time. Do not bargain. I will give 10 minutes if you will clear my inbox. Do not measure your prayer by sensations. No scorekeeping of tingles, warmths, or tears. Do not turn this into another metric on your tracker. Never. 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 This is worship in spirit and in truth, not performance. It cannot be graded. It can only be entered. How does it work? Gratitude and love, without object, open consciousness. They dissolve resistance because they remove desire's hook. When there is nothing to get, the grasp relaxes, and in that unclenched awareness, the presence that always is becomes available as felt peace. Not a drugged quiet, but the Sabbath at the center, guidance that has tone, timing that carries its own authority, and an impulse of right action that rises unforced like a spring. In other words, the Christ within is not summoned. He is revealed when obstruction thins, and that revelation is the government acting as wisdom, order, and sufficiency. At first, you may feel bareness, emptiness, even boredom. Good. That is the personal sense losing its throne and complaining as it goes. Stay. Do not anesthetize the moment with a plan. If you are patient, 5 minutes, 15, or on some days only a brief, clear click, the impartation comes. Sometimes it is felt right there as a soft authority. Sometimes it adds itself outwardly later as an ease in a task, a word that arrives whole, a door that meets you open. But always the law is the same. Go to God for God. Father, reveal thyself, and let the works be His. Then the day, still full, is no longer heavy, because the doing has returned to its rightful doer. Now then, since you have sat in that silence and knocked at the door of your own consciousness without asking for a single thing, what happens next? You do not wake to angels moving your furniture. You wake to a day that looks very much like yesterday, but it meets you differently, and you meet it differently. The first sign is this: compulsion loosens. You are no longer sprinting at the bell like a racehorse at the gate. There is an inner measuredness, a Sabbath at the center, and out of that stillness, priorities rise of their own accord. One task, without noise, presents itself as the next right thing, and you notice that the 5 others fall silent for now, without threatening you from the corner. You see, speech simplifies. You stop explaining yourself into fatigue. Emails shrink and say exactly what they must say. Meetings are shorter because you are not defending an outline, you are listening for truth. Reactive decisions, the kind you make to stop your fear rather than to serve your purpose, grow fewer. A surprising sufficiency of time appears, not because the clock changed, but because the wasted motion of inner argument ceases. I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. When the government is within, the day orders itself by law, not by push. Let me offer you a pattern I have witnessed over and over and over again. After 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 of wordless gratitude, a call you were about to place suddenly rings into you. The right person, at the right moment, with the right tone, added, not chased. Or that weight you intended to carry all afternoon, another's mood, a colleague's unfinished work, drops away because you see, cleanly, it was never yours to carry. Or the barrenness hour comes, 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock, when ideas have always refused you. And for no reason at all, a sentence lands whole. A plan clarifies in 3 steps, and the stickiness of the task is gone. Not magic. Law. Do not misunderstand me. Challenges remain. Children still spill the milk. Markets still turn. The computer still crashes at the least poetic moment. But here is the difference, and it is everything. You are not at war within about any of it. Human ease requires pleasant circumstances. Spiritual ease is rest at the center regardless of the weather. You respond, you adjust, you repair, but without the strain of being the private source. And because there is no inner wrestling, the outer steps are fewer, cleaner, more timely. This is the added principle the Master gave us. Seek first the kingdom, the contact, and all these things shall be added unto you in their season. Ideas, meetings, resources, strength come as you need them, not as trophies for having prayed correctly, but as the natural expression of right government. To our old sense it may look miraculous. To God it is simple order. Never, never, never believe that grace suspends law. Grace is the law of spiritual government operating where we finally stopped trying to be governor. And so the day without fanfare becomes simpler, not by luck, not by clever hacks, but by the lawful unfolding of a life no longer carried by me, but lived by the Father within. Now then, Since we have watched the day become simpler under new government, let us walk this straight into the arena where the fear shouts the loudest. If I stop striving, will my work collapse? Will my goals dissolve? Will success pass me by? Watch out. I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. Only what was propped up by personal sense collapses when personal sense is released. What is born of contact, of inspiration, right timing, right place, right people, stands because it is carried by law, not by your shoulders. In other words, sand falls, rock abides. If some structure does fall when you stop pushing, let it go with gratitude. It was sand, and it was merciful to see it early. You see, we must purify motive if we would be free of strain. Work is holy when it is an outlet, an avenue for the infinite to take form as service, beauty, clarity, order. Work becomes bondage the instant it is used to prove your worth, to purchase love, to guarantee safety, or to silence the fear that you are not enough. The hunger for validation is the hidden furnace that overheats the system. When we let the Father within be the doer, the work remains and often multiplies, but the hunger is gone. You are not feeding an identity, you are yielding a channel. Success, then, is no longer a verdict. It is the added sign that form has matched essence for a moment. Ambition does not die under grace. It is redeemed. Its aim changes from "make me somebody" to "let truth find fuller expression." The fire remains, ideas still arrive at midnight, excellence still matters, but the fire is clean. It does not scorch you, it warms the world. You do not stop creating, you stop using creation as a pill for loneliness, fear, or self-doubt. And strangely, when ambition is purified, opportunities increase because they are no longer filtered through tight fists. Doors open because you are not ramming them. The right no appears as mercifully as the right yes. Now then, here is a simple inward checklist. Use it as often as the breath. Am I pushing for an outcome or being led to a step? Am I trying to force a door, or is a door inviting me? Am I using productivity to medicate fear, to sedate guilt, to outrun grief? Am I outlining who must say yes, by when, and in what tone? If any yes appears to those, stop. Return to contact. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Father, reveal thyself, and nothing else. Let the pressure fall off the throne. Let the government transfer again, and then move on the first clear impulse that rises out of rest. Humility is your safety. Never pretend you are beyond effort if you are not. Keep your lists, keep your plans, keep your appointments, but do not enthrone them. Let effort be a servant, not a master. Let excellence be obedience, not self-justification. I have no spiritual pride in saying this. I know where I am and where I am not yet, and that honesty has been my shelter. Acknowledge your present stage, and then, gently, repeatedly, yield. Grace does not take you out of life. Grace takes the strain out of life by removing personal sense as the source. Then you will find, to your surprise, that more is done with less wear, that reach increases while rest deepens, and that what used to demand your push now arrives by timing. Not magic, law. The Father within doeth the works, and you, relieved of being the private doer, become the transparent place where success can pass without sticking, where ambition can burn without smoke, and where work can be service without weight. Now then, Because life is lived between emails and errands and children calling from the next room. Let us be very simple and very gentle with ourselves. We must never use the words right and wrong about the moments when you slip back into me. There are states and stages of consciousness, and the habit of personal doing is old. Do not scold it. Notice it. Let the very recognition become your church bell calling you home. Ah, the throne of me is trying to sit again. Smile and return. How will you know it is happening? Watch the signs. Urgency. Clock panic without a clear reason. Resentment. Why must it all depend on me? Mental rehearsal. Running scenes like a lawyer cross-examining the future. Bargaining prayer. Father, just give me enough oomph to get through this one thing and I'll rest later. Control fantasies. Imagining safety only if every variable bows to your outline. You see, these are not sins. They are dashboard lights. They say, as kindly as lights can say, you have slipped back into managing effects. Return to contact. What then, in the middle of the day, when the inbox is warm and the body a little tight? Here is a micro practice. Pause. One full breath you do not run. Inwardly release the steering wheel. Actually feel the hands unclench. Whisper, if words help, Father, reveal thyself, and add nothing else. Let gratitude rise without an object. Gratitude because God is, not because anything just happened for you. Wait a few heartbeats in that wordless consent, and then ask not, what should I accomplish, but what is the next right step? Move only on the inner yes that is quiet and clean. 30 seconds can reset a day. 2 minutes can return the government to its rightful king. Now then, let us clear a confusion that breeds much fatigue. Responsibility is holy and simple. An action you can take now in love and order. Burden is the belief that you must guarantee outcomes. Responsibility answers the phone. Burden tries to control the other end of the line. Responsibility sends the invoice. Burden tries to force when and how it will be paid. Responsibility is obedience. Burden is ownership. And ownership is where the weight hides. Yield ownership. Keep obedience. You may say, but I forget every hour. Good, then return every hour. I am speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. The way to live without willpower is not perfection. It is repeated returning, again and again, to the inner contact where the Christ does the works. Each return weakens the old reflex. Each return proves, a little more deeply, that you are not alone, not the source, not the doer. And as that confidence grows, the signs appear by law. Less hurry in the same hour, fewer words in the same meeting, clearer steps in the same fog, and a rest that does not wait for circumstances to improve before it abides. So let us make of relapse a sacrament. When the bell rings, urgency, resentment, rehearsal, answer it not with shame, but with surrender. Father within, do thou the works. Then take the next simple responsibility and leave the outcomes to law. Over and over and over again until the habit of returning becomes the new atmosphere and the old governor finds no chair left to occupy. And you, at rest in the midst of motion, discover that grace has not improved your willpower. Grace has replaced it.